talking about mental illness is scary. Imagine what happens when we don't talk about it. Join the conversation. Visit letstalkstigma.org.
Hello, everyone. I'm Matt Smith, Executive Director of Preventionfocus and Chair of the Anti-Stigma Coalition. On behalf of all of us with that organization, I would like to welcome you to the latest in our series of Facebook Live events. This time, our program is called Encountering Grief and Stigma. Everyone at some points in their lives experiences the loss of loved ones, but how feelings of grief play out can be very unique for each person experiencing them. There are no absolute rules. Just like all mental health challenges, stigma can have a negative impact on any person's grieving process. Today, our panel will discuss this and also give some practical advice to those who grieve and the friends and family who support them. Before I introduce the panel, a couple of quick things. Our program is up for up to 1 hour, and during this time, if you have a question or comment, please type it into the chat box and we'll respond accordingly. Your questions often lead to some great dialogue, so please don't be shy. Now, on to our panelists. Gwen Mysiak. Gwen is the Executive Director and co-founder of the Western New York Compassion Connection, a center for grieving children and families, which is connected to the P.U.N.T Pediatric Cancer Collaborative. After nearly 18 years working in leadership roles at WNED, Buffalo Toronto Public Media, Gwen became the Executive Director of P.U.N.T, where she has served since 2012. She developed a peer support bereavement program for pediatric cancer loss, and the success of that program has led to the recent opening of the center, which helps grieving children and families, regardless of the origin of their loss, to navigate their journey to healing and resilience through the power of peer support. The center also fosters grief literacy through community outreach. Welcome to our panel, Gwen.
Thank you, Matt.
Jeffrey Sturmer. Jeffrey has been with the Spiritual Care Department at Hospice Buffalo for 21 years. He has a Master of Divinity degree from Christ the King Seminary and has been in ministry for 31 years. Jeffrey has years of experience working with children, adults, and families providing grief support services. He often speaks with survivors who struggle with spiritual concerns following the death of a loved one. Thanks for joining us, Jeffrey.
Thank you.
Finally, Daniel Distasio. Dan is a 1984 graduate of St. Joseph Collegiate Institute and a 2010 graduate of Simmons Institute of Mortuary Science in Syracuse, New York. Before he became a funeral director, Dan spent 22 years in the beverage industry, working for Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, Poland Spring Water, and Crystal Rock Bottled Water. After the sudden passing of his father in 2009, Dan decided to change careers and became a licensed funeral director. Dan has served as a professional funeral director in the Syracuse and Buffalo areas. In 2015, Dan purchased Hills Funeral Chapel in South Dayton, New York, and the funeral home is now known as Distasio Funeral Home Incorporated. He also owns Morse Funeral Home in Brockton, New York. Great to have you with us, Dan.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we have a great panel assembled here today, and to start, I'd like to hear from each of you about your organizations and businesses, and also about any personal experiences that led you to your current positions. Gwen, could we start with you?
Sure, thank you. So I had the honor of assuming my role as Executive Director of P.U.N.T Pediatric Cancer Collaborative back in 2012, following the loss of my cousin to pediatric cancer. And I quickly realized within about 3 to 4 months, there was a tremendous lapse of service in the wake of a loss to pediatric cancer. So we established an annual retreat within a few months and, began to learn about the power of peer support in grief. So I'm very honored to be here, both serving as executive director and then also through lived experience. As the years went on, we received a lot of inquiries about expanding, our service beyond pediatric cancer loss, but we were growing as an organization. So we kind of felt like we had to stay in our lane, but then through all our community has been through, the pandemic, our mass shooting, blizzard deaths, so much here that we've been affected by, in addition to some really tough personal losses. We really started to realize that we could be a champion, to serve in a broader way here in Western New York. And so probably the most personal loss, for me, and I was actually championing having a peer support grief center very much in the summer of 2022 after I attended the National Alliance for Grieving Children Symposium and met over 200 grief centers throughout the country that were doing amazing work in the realm of grief literacy and peer support. And it just saddened me when I returned here to Buffalo that we didn't have anything of that, or nature. So, really, if you were talking to me in summer of 2022 at a backyard barbecue or in the Wegmans deli line or at work or at home, you were hearing about this amazing concept and how much I wish we had one here in Western New York. And then my daughter suffered the loss of her two very best friends in a terrible car accident, and followed on the heels of, after I returned from that conference, my 52-year-old husband dying of a sudden unexpected heart attack, September 6th of 2022. In the blink of an eye, I went from grief professional and advocate to a grieving widow and mother of three grieving children. And I'm honored to serve with our assistant director, Jonathan McGrath, who lost his little boy to pediatric cancer. And so the two of us just decided at that point there was no turning back. And as a result of a $500,000 state grant last year, I'm very proud to be sitting in Western New York Compassion Connection, a center for grieving children and families, which opened its doors in April to our community for any origin of loss.
Well, congratulations on that wonderful accomplishment and those great services that you've been bringing to the community. What exactly can people expect when they contact you, or how do we go about getting people at the services at the center?
Yeah, thank you. So again, we're a peer support model. So, we're not clinical. We're developing strong working relationships with our mental health partners for referrals. But a lot of data to illustrate that peer support is a very powerful mechanism for grieving children and families. So our center has wonderful space for every age for children, ranging from 5 to right through teen years, parent meeting rooms. We're running origin of loss support groups, so suicide, overdose. We're also we have been developing groups as we've been getting calls. We have a group for adults, older adults who have lost adult children. So as we're really interfacing with the community, we're able to provide additional support services. So we have a rigorous training program for volunteers that then become peer support facilitators. And so we have family groups, parents come in, and then the kids split up by age. And so that's kind of the main thrust here is the peer support groups. We also have social events and activities. We have a mom's coffee hour that's going on across the hall from me right now. We have every other Wednesday, dads are meeting to support one another, bereaved dads. But I always say that we can build a beautiful sanctuary for grieving people to hide away from, to be together with people who understand. But if we don't mobilize our mission right out our front door here on Walden Avenue in Lancaster, into schools, into workplaces, into other community nonprofits, we will undo everything that happens here in terms of grieving people feeling supported. So our grief literacy mission is equally as important as the peer support that happens inside our doors.
That's all really, really impressive and wonderful and so necessary. And we'll talk more about that as we go. Thanks for all that sharing, Gwen. We really appreciate it.
It's an honor to be here, Matt. Thank you.
Jeffrey, I think everyone's probably heard of hospice, but I think that, it would be great if you wouldn't mind just making sure we all understand truly what it does and what your role is.
So my role is in spiritual care, obviously. And I think, one of the, if you will, thoughts about hospice, in quotes, is that, it's always the end. So everything's all about the end. And I really kind of like to sometimes dispel that sort of, if you will, stigma, and say that it's really about the living, right? It's about the person who is still present among us. I've had my own family members that I've cared for within hospice. So it's all about them, and it's all about the families too. So it's how we can live through a rather difficult time in a person's life and in the family's life. But I like to always encourage people to think about hospice as the living. I think maybe people hear the commercials and everything about hope, and perhaps that's a word that I would really like to encourage folks to take note of when they think about hospice, that it is hope-filled. So I don't really believe any one of us knows. And Gwen, I'm sorry, for the loss of your husband and everything and the suddenness of it. And I sometimes feel that people don't realize how vulnerable our life is at any stage, healthy or not healthy. So we want to concentrate on the living. We want to concentrate on that which, as I always enjoy, people talking about what has given them meaning and purpose in life, where they still find meaning and purpose in life. And that's something I hope, sorry about the word, but I'm longing for people just to kind of change their, if you will, misperception of who we are and what we do. I think along with compassion, connection, we too have our bereavement services over at our Wilson building on the campus here. So it's not just about the time that a person's with us, but also after the person passes too. And really, one of the great gifts, and I've been a part of this, is it's not only for adults, but we have an incredible essential care program that reaches out to perinatal families and helps support them through that time. I had the privilege of being with a family now several years ago that they knew that the baby was going to be non-viable, but yet we created such a beautiful environment for the family to truly love and nurture that baby, only living a week's time, but nonetheless so significant and important, and a treasure that I have and I will always carry, being with this particular family and being with the infant as well. So we go beyond the adult. One of the most difficult things I think about getting older now is that we're seeing younger and younger people in hospice care. So, but we just want to make sure that, and I guess for me, I want to make sure that people know that it stretches beyond the limits. It's just not for the aging.
That's good to know. That's really good to know. I'm curious, what is it about this work that drew you to it, Jeff?
What is about the work that I enjoy and find fulfillment in is actually listening to amazing stories. I keep on repeating one story about a gentleman I met that worked on the Gemini program. And he often quipped, it was the valves that got this rocket back down to Earth. The astronaut is here. So he talked about what he did, but then he also talked about, and the family concurred with this after he died, that when he left work, it was all about family. And this gentleman talked about how special and significant each one of his kids were. And his kids, after they experienced the loss of this gentleman, they concurred that, yes, indeed, when Dad was not working, we were 100% of his priority. So people talking about and sharing stories about where they have found meaning and purpose in their life, what they have done. The one thing that I'm treasuring about Western New York, and I'm such a proponent about Buffalo, is we have amazing creative people living right here in our community. We may not be a great big environment, but we are certainly a magnificent group of people. And so I really find that to be, I also treasure the way in which there is such dignity offered to an individual, and the individual offering that same dignity back to the family at a very vulnerable time in their life. And that's another word that I just reflect upon so often is dignity. Dignity for everyone. So those are the, and even with this, what led me here today, when you talk about anti-stigma and everything, there are so many layers within our community of individuals of all walks, and to learned that each one treasured each one of those experiences where people have dealt with the LGBTQ community and how they've navigated that world. And really, I found parents and children being so real about who they are, what they sometimes have felt have been traps for them because the community didn't want to speak about certain issues, and them being able to find security. That's why, Gwen, I appreciated what you said too about just finding a place where people can grieve, people can be real and safe. And that's a huge word, is people's safety.
All great. And thank you so much, Jeffrey, for all of that. Dan, you've got a very interesting story to me.
Yes, I do. Thank you. You talked about in my bio, in 2009, my dad passed away suddenly after retiring. And the same year, I was in the beverage industry for 22 years, but the same year my job was eliminated. And I lived in Syracuse with 5 children and a mortgage, and just couldn't find the job that we wanted to have. And I go back to the funeral director who took care of us for my dad, and talk about, the raw grief and the grief I had for my father and other things that were going on. I decided to go to school. I lived in Syracuse. Simmons Institute for Mortuary Science was in Syracuse. It was established over 100 years ago at that time. And I said, well, let's do that and try to help families get through the grief that I was going through. And that the funeral director that took care of us in Buffalo did an awesome job with helping us at that time. Because when you're a funeral director, you're right at the beginning. You're at that raw stage of death and grief. And, and we talk about people under hospice and people that aren't sudden. At the time it comes for them to call me, it's sudden. It's because even though they were there and that they've gone through this for maybe 2 years or 6 months or 2 weeks, that is the time when they're meeting with me. That's the finality. And we talk about grief, and they're at the beginning stages of grief when they come into me, and just like the funeral director that helped me and my family, she started us off and directed us through the beginning processes of that grief. And till this today, I'm blessed that I was able to go to school and move back to Buffalo and work for firms in Buffalo, and then buy my own place out in farm country of South Dayton, which I'd never even heard of South Dayton before I moved out here. And South Dayton is a dairy farming community with generations of families that have been in that occupation. And it's, I never realized how tough a career dairy farmers have. I mean, their whole life is around them cows. And with Distasio Funeral Home, that I'm dealing with generations. So even I've been there 10 years. I've seen multiple deaths in families. So it makes it easier for families to come see me because they've already dealt with me and they know the process. And if they haven't, then they've heard in the community that I'm there. And, and I do all sorts of things in the town. I'm a town councilman. I sub bus drive for the school district. And you just try to be involved with the community. So when that time comes, they're a little less, how can I say it, worried about coming in to see a funeral director they don't know. So in 2023, our in the funeral industry, things are going to cremation, which poses a whole nother problem with grief. And to keep up with rising costs, I decided to purchase another funeral home in Brockton, New York. Brockton, New York is it's called Moore's Funeral Home. I kept the same name. It's 98 years old. I did just move to a new location, but we're still right in the middle of Brockton, New York. And out here, it's a farming community as well, but for grapes. There's a lot of grapes in it, and it's the same type of community, which fits in with the model we have of helping families and helping them get through the time of need. And I'm just blessed to have communities behind my back, and I'm blessed that I can help them get through the process of dealing with grief. And to this day, this helps me with my own grief, and helps me because it's my honor to take care of these families, and it comforts me to help them.
Yeah.
Because,
I think
go ahead.
it's wonderful that you're in this unique position and you acknowledge and understand that you have this role to help and move along and provide services and that, and counseling to some degree to people as they present. And it's really great that you've found a way to make that happen.
Yeah, it's not a job to me. It's more of a way of life. We're out here, and this is what I like. This is what I want to do. And I'm actually worried. Next week I'm having a knee replacement, so I'm going to be down for a couple of days. But my wife's like, a couple of days. I don't know about that, but
well, good luck with that. That's tough.
Thank you.
I want to move along a little bit here with what's occurred to me is I heard all the different stories and I heard all the different circumstances there's got to be some differences, I would think. Are there differences due to circumstances like long-term illness versus a sudden event, children versus adults? I think about crime victims, military casualties, suicide. Gwen, what are some of the differences of the grieving process with these different possibilities?
Well, again, grief is so unique, to the griever, regardless of the origin of loss. We always kind of say here, we try not to do the pain Olympics, where I get the gold because this happened to me, and, not to compare grief. I mean, it's just so individual. It's so personal. It's not linear. There's no stages you move through. It has no beginning and end. It's a spiral staircase, and you can have a few good days. And then there's other days where grief has you in vice grip that you can't look away from. And so, there's certainly, there's a lot of research behind, traumatic loss and the way that your neural pathways quite literally get rewired after you've kind of had the trapdoor of your life open. And, it's one of those, like, 1 minute you're here and the fault line comes and the next minute you're there. There's a lot about anticipatory grief. And, sometimes even though that loss is coming, as Dan mentioned, when the person's actually gone, nothing really can adequately prepare you, for living a life without your person. So those things get a little tricky sometimes, because what we find with grief is it's very difficult, to have anything in black and white, and certainly there's things we know, and again, research has shown. But and then the other point I think I'll make to that is the data that we've received about, children grieving. And, we kind of say, if you're old enough to love, you're old enough to grieve. And, just how young, kids start to really understand the gravity of a loss in their home, in their lives. And, that's why, we really try to work here as young as 4 years old. They can come, to our peer support groups and start to just connect with other kids, who are living kind of their same reality. So, I think that, like I said, we find a lot, sometimes it's good here to group, especially parents by origin of loss, because, if you've lost a child, and of course the stigma of suicide, which is always still such a tough thing, those people need to find their own people versus someone that gets that diagnosis. And then from the minute you get that diagnosis, your life flips upside down. But it's a different journey, to your loss. So we've had a lot of success here by making sure that you can find your people within your specific grief journey. And it's really, really powerful. So, but again, to say something's, worse or better, or easier, those are some of the stigmas, I think, that get attached to types of loss, that it really is unfair, to the grieving person, because at the end of the day, when your person is gone and you're trying to navigate a life without them, it doesn't matter how they died. It doesn't matter even what your relationship was. You're having a really, personal experience that is life-changing. And a life sentence, again, there's no, as long as you love that person, your grief is part of you, and it's part of your relationship with them now. So, we put so much pressure on grieving people get on with it, to get over it. We live in a society that just does not hold space, where people feel embarrassed if they cry, or they feel weak if they're still yearning for their loved one. Why do we do that to people? I think the more our culture becomes grief sensitive, and the more people feel like their grief can live with them in the workplace, at a family party, when they're talking to their friends, then we're going to really begin to kind of reduce or diminish the stigma that comes with some of the things that we've just been taught in our death denying culture.
Gwen, Matt, if I can say one thing about children in the funeral home. If you remember back in the day, families kept their children from the funeral homes. So their grief of their grandparents, or even their parents, and if they were young, was, hey, where are they? What happened to, they didn't get that final exposure, that final sight of their loved one. And I practice with my families. They come in that they should encourage, if they're understandably, if the children don't want to, that's fine, but encourage, and have them come up and say goodbye, and so they know down the road when they're 10, 12 years old, hey, where was grandpa? Did I really know him? And there was stigma back then that young children should have been kept away from death.
Yeah, we see that a lot.
I kind of want to tag on to that too. One of the things that happens here is families will ask me, so, my child's 7 years old, I suppose they shouldn't come here. And I try to educate parents in particular, grandparents in particular, that it's important to offer the opportunity, because once the death happens, you can't get that time back. So years down the road, and maybe Gwen, this is kind of tagging on you a little bit, years down the road, they're grieving the loss of their grandparent, and they say to the parent, why didn't you let me come to see? And that is such a trigger for, and it compounds, the grief compounds at that point. So that's why I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I wanted to make sure that, that we know that all three of us, we all seem like we're speaking the same language, from anticipatory all the way through, especially when it comes to children, though. And I don't mean to be this in a religious sort of way, but Jesus said, let the children come to me because they know about the kingdom. And I think, it is so oftentimes that a child is able to say something that, unfortunately, because of stigma, an adult feels they can't say, or it's hard for them to say. And I oftentimes see how a child is able to bring healing even into this intense pain that a family's enduring. And so I'm glad that both of you, I'm glad we brought up the fact of how important it is for children, and how important it is to recognize that they're grieving as well. We don't grieve as adults, but we grieve as children as well.
Yeah.
One of the blessings, though, in my own personal life was that my family always allowed us to grieve, even from the time I remember being 7 and losing my Uncle Frank, and my family did not hide that away from me. And I'm grateful for that now, because I think I can bring that, to what we do here. But
thank you, Jeffrey. We've got our first question coming in from the chat. Remember, anyone that's watching right now, if you have a question, please just put it in the chat box and we will get to them and respond accordingly. Kind of talking about this already, but how long is too long to grieve a loss? And is it okay to feel tired and the effects of the loss years later?
Again, grief, it's not linear, and we always say, as long as you love, you're going to grieve. I think, there's a point in time where that loss gets integrated into your new reality. And of course, it's important, that's where we go back to this grief sensitive culture. We're hoping to, work together to create, when you can carry it with you and honor it as a sacred part of your relationship with your person, it gets a lot easier to live with it, and you never get over it, but you do learn to carry it with you, and hopefully with support in a healthy, functional way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to say that there's no time limit. there is no time limit. I think about the grieving of my 16-year-old cousin, and I was only 10, and I still grieve her loss to this day. So there is no time limit. I think we learn how to live with it, maybe celebrate that person in the life that we're living now, maybe take a little bit of that person's treasure in life and gift and share it with others. So maybe it's our way in which we're working through the grief, but do we ever get over it? Absolutely not.
And I think we see so many grieving people here that feel that pressure, the pressure that we put on people, you know, and that shame if they're not doing better, if they're having one of those days. I mean, we had parents walk through our door and their child may have died 7 years ago, but guess what? This is the day they would have been graduating high school, or, you know, they're going to a wedding of one of their friends, and it's, you know, so activating, and it brings you back like it just happened again, you know? So I feel like the more that we understand that, you know, grief, there's no timeline, the more sensitively we can deal with the grievers in our lives, and not putting any pressure on them to get on with it and get over it, because all that does is compound their pain. And often it results in them isolating, you know, because they feel so misunderstood. And so they disconnect from relationships, because it's just easier than, you know, exacerbating their pain with sometimes what feels like insensitive comments from very well-intentioned people.
It's
Dan, I've got another question.
Always being validated. I think, Gwen, that's what I don't mean to put a word into your mouth, but validating, and more oftentimes, yes, people do draw themselves away from community because they're invalidated. The one word that struck me, and I wrote it down, Dan, was when you used the word sudden. No matter if it's sudden or not sudden, it's always sudden. It is always feeling sudden. My dad suffered for 10 years from lymphoma cancer, and my mom, to the day that she left us, always talked about it being and feeling like his loss was sudden. So for her, that pain was so raw and real. But more oftentimes, that's what I see as the invalidation of grief, and that draws people further away from communities. So places like Compassion Connection is the place where we can feel, I'm going to reuse the word, safe, you know, knowing that it continues, our grief continues.
I wanted to bring up something that happened to me and my wife. We were blessed with 5 children, and after our second children, we lost a baby. And at that time, I think I was one of the people that didn't want to think about grief. I was working. My wife went to the hospital and lost the baby. I was working. I wasn't there, and the grief, I don't know, it just didn't seem real to me at that time. But my wife, to this day, still lives with that grief of the child we lost. And I think I had the stigma back then is just keep working and not think about it. And this was before I was in the position that I'm in now. And then the sudden grief of my father, because we really we had grandparents that passed, but I mean, it wasn't like a parent. And then loss of that child, even to this day, she's still, and I do too, I think of that baby. And so we go back to that question of, is it ever too long to grieve a loss? I mean, no. I mean, yeah, we come to find acceptance, but you know, every day we think of that person that we either loved or could have loved, and if you forget about it and accept it, then it's not there. So I think there's no time. I mean, I don't think we should be tired of it after years.
All very good points. For those of you just joining us, I'm Matt Smith from the Anti-Stigma Coalition, and I'm joined by Gwen Mysiak of the West Year Compassion Connection, Jeffrey Sturmer from Hospice Buffalo, and Funeral Director Dan Distasio. We're discussing grief and loss today. Everyone joining us, please do take a minute and check out our website, letstalkstigma.org, or maybe join the over 4,000 others in taking the pledge to end stigma. Also, if you're connected with a business, organization, or the faith community, you can become an organizational member of the Anti-Stigma Coalition. You can find information for this on the website under the Members tab. Now, back to our conversation. I know we talked a little bit offline about and it actually came up here just a little bit, why grieving adequately is so important. And Gwen, I know you had some graphics that prepared. If maybe we could call those up and talk about some of those important numbers, if you're able to right now.
Yeah.
So what do we see here?
Thank you. Yeah. So when we got on our quest, to really establish a peer support grief center here in Western New York, we were able to go to a grief center in Denver, Colorado, Judy's house, and they have the JAG Institute, which does a lot of the research that's crafting the best practices. And when we obtained the data for Western New York in particular, I mean, there was just no turning back for us. It felt like a mandate. You can see it here, especially with regard to grieving children. So 1 in 11 children in the 7-county Western New York area will experience the death of a parent or sibling by 18. That's like 8.9%. I was just in Kansas City at the National Alliance for Children's Grief symposium last week. And, nationally, 1 in 4 suicide deaths is a bereaved child, which is astonishing. There's a 197% higher rate of substance misuse in bereaved children. So we've been saying that a lot here. To our space and they see it's beautiful and wonderful and oh, how nice that we're providing bereavement support. Grief support isn't nice, it's imperative. This is life or death. This is people making destructive life decisions or anesthetizing their pain because they don't know how to get through a loss, or again, they're residing in a grief insensitive, society that doesn't know how to support them. So we're really about tools, language. We've done professional trainings here, everyone from school administrators to first responders to attorneys to healthcare professionals that were clamoring for better tools to support the grieving people in their lives, or to do their jobs better when they're dealing with grieving people. So, we teach a lot about that in language, the what to say and what not to say. Again, this is all research backed, so the data is very sobering in terms of how important this is. I think sometimes grief has that stigma of it's emotional. It's that period of time, the whole bereavement days that you get at work and all of the things, that make us feel like, it's just like a time to like work through in the immediate wake of a loss. But it's so much more complex than that.
It definitely is. I wanted to kind of tie that in, Gwen, on a personal level. We recently lost my mom after suffering from dementia for a number of years. And it was striking how 2 different employers can handle the time before and after so differently. My sister, who works for a daycare center in the area, her employer chose to be completely unsupportive and unhelpful during my sister's time of initial, preparing to and then losing, and then I have my friends here at Hospice Buffalo, say, no, you really need to take the time that you need to take because the time is important, that time is valuable. I think that, we have to remember that, because of the complex nature and levels and layers of grief, support is very important. I just wanted to share that because it kind of.
And Jeff, I think that's a very good point. I mean, workplaces need to be understanding and understand the role. Hopefully, move more toward more kindness and allowing people the space and the services that they need. And even when that happens, though, Dan, I'm going to look to you now because I know you're working with families a lot, and you present options for them. We know that many people who have a mental health issue of any kind, only a small percentage of them actually seek out the services and actually complete those services. So what's getting in the way? Why wouldn't someone want to seek out support? Dan, have you encountered that?
I've encountered people coming in and I'm so sorry. Coming in and can you repeat the question? I apologize.
Yeah, it's really what I'm saying is that
there was someone at my front door. I'm so sorry.
Well, don't worry about it. I mean, Gwen pointed out how important it is to make sure that grieving adequately is important, and the things that can happen when we don't provide those supports and people don't get the supports that they need. But we also know that even with the supports being available, And even when you have an employer who maybe would be willing and able, there's still a large percentage of people that don't seek those out and don't do it. And what's happening that causes that to occur, I guess is my question.
So what's happening is they're not getting support from their employer. That's what you're saying, right?
No, what I'm saying is, why would they choose to not seek out supports? What's in the way culturally, in their own value system, in their own norms, that would stop them from seeking out services and participating in it?
Well, some people, and like we talk about with the stigma, they're afraid to even talk about grief and talk about death. And even when they come into the funeral home, they have issues even talking about what we're going to do for their loved one. And I don't know if it's a mindset or if it was generationally put into their heads that death was something we don't talk about, or something that we don't want to deal with. It's hard. And then I've seen a lot of, you see a lot of families that come in and then they just walk out. They walk out, a lot of the brothers and the sisters, and they just don't want to deal with it. So one person in the family has to take care of all the arrangements. And it's wild to me that at this day and age that families, it's hard for them to accept, and especially out in the community I'm in, it's hard to accept death. And all the families are together all the time because of the jobs that they have. And in my position here, we try to direct them through the process, and that's what they want. They want someone to be there to take care of them and to show them which way to go. And that's why at the end of every conference or end of any family coming into the funeral home and their services, I give out my cell phone. I tell them, call me whenever you want. Just even talk. I mean, it's something that again, I think generationally out here where I'm at now, we're still behind the times when it comes to thinking about death. And but yeah, no, we see that a lot where they don't want help. Yeah. They just think that they're going to get through it, just like I was just talking about in regards to when we lost our baby. And people got to realize, and then hopefully people are watching us today, that the only way to help with grief is to talk to somebody about it, not to hold it in, not to keep it, as they say, inside. Because that tends to run into the problems we run with sudden death, with suicide or and things like that bring big people to the point where they don't think they can function anymore.
I'll also add.
I know we talked offline a little bit about even crying and the role of crying and how we view crying. Would you mind sharing some of your thoughts on that?
Well, I was saying, we have our tissue boxes here at Western New York Compassion Connection has this crying releases stress hormones, and we have our citation where we got that from. But I will often say, when we're doing presentations, what's the first thing that happens if you're in an exchange with somebody and they start to cry? Almost invariably, the person who's crying will start to apologize and will be embarrassed, right? And will start to profusely apologize. And the other person will immediately panic and do whatever they can to stop them crying. Here's a tissue. No, it's okay. Don't cry. Right? How often do we just say those words? Don't cry. Don't cry. Yet crying releases stress hormones. That's the way that, physiologically we were given, that ability in order to release those big emotions that sometimes don't have words or don't have another outlet. And so we kind of quip here at Western New York Compassion Connection. We want to take out billboards that say normalize crying in public. But I think that we can all start with the people in our lives. And it's uncomfortable sometimes to just hold space, to be in that bit of silence and awkwardness, but push through that and let that person know that it's okay, that you're here for them, instead of our natural reaction to just stuff them up and get the crying to stop. And, even in our grief center, when people are sharing, they will apologize when they begin to cry, and so that's, again, a thing that we're trying to kind of teach and push through to kind of just normalize those moments. And so that people can just release that pain through tears.
Yeah, I think that is definitely a stigma that we're all up against. That very act, and what's okay and what's not okay, and our comfort level with that. And I think that's a worthy pursuit. I think to keep on with that kind of messaging. We got several questions that have come in the chat box. I want to get to them, and one of them is, what do grieving people really need from their family and friends? And a related question is, what are some of the do's and don'ts for people supporting someone who is grieving?
I was going to say, I've been looking at that question, and the one word that comes to my mind is listening. That really, I don't think any one of us are going to fix anything. We can't fix, I'm sure, for those of us who have experienced traumatic losses, another wants to fix it, but it's not fixable. So, the one word is simply listening. It's very open. I can share with you a specific example. My daughter last night was, she was grieving the fact that this exchange student is going back to Bulgaria, and she isn't going to be walking to class with Josephine. And Josephine said it's so much different now than it was when her friend went on vacation, because she knew her friend was coming back. But she knows now she's going back to her country and may not see this person again. That's intense. And I could just listen. I wasn't going to be able to fix that type of grief, other than to just listen and to validate that, yes, that's real, Josephine. And yes, it is grieving. Maybe it's a silly example, but it's a real example, kind of tied into that question that was going to be asked of Gwen later on. Is it just dealing with the loss of a person, or is it dealing with other things? And yes, grief deals with other things. And for Josephine today, she is grieving.
So we at Western New York Compassion Connection, to kind of tag into, what Jeff said about the listening, also trying to give people a toolbox. Again, a lot of research about the language we use when we're supporting grieving people. And just like a few of the tips that we train here at Western New York Compassion Connection, if you're going to start anything you're about to say with "at least," don't say it. At least you have other children. At least they didn't suffer. At least you got to say goodbye. All of those things, all they serve to do is invalidate the person's pain, so never say "at least." Even the trite, "I'm sorry for your loss." That's our default here. "I'm sorry for your loss," but that feels hollow to grievers. It really does. The thoughts and prayers, we talked about that yesterday. How about saying, "I'm sorry you're going through this pain from losing your person," and even the whole notion of loved one. Not every relationship is a favorable, loving relationship. We have kids coming here, and if dad struggled with substance misuse, it's complicated. And so we even try to say, like, "Sorry for the loss of your loved one," like the person you're grieving. So we do a lot of work here with the, like, what to say and what not to say. Another thing, let me know if you need anything. And again, grieving people don't know what they need. They're working on getting out of bed, taking a shower, feeding their children. They don't know what they need. So really, like, knowing what might help them, so, "Hi, Dawn, I know that your child goes to, baseball practice on Thursday. Can I drive them this week? So you can just take a little time for yourself. Would that be helpful to you?" Things like that really give a specific offering, are so much more helpful than the blanket, let me know if there's anything you need. Because chances are they're not going to be able to tell you. And even if they could, they're not going to want to imposition you, or they might not be able to even vocalize in that moment. And also, what people need changes. Back to what Dan was talking about at the beginning, shock buffers so much pain and an unexpected loss at the beginning. You're not even really able to process your grief at the beginning. You are in straight up survival mode, so the need for help might come 1, 2, even 3 years later, and when people are already thinking you're moved on, you've accepted it, your loss happened how many months, years ago, when really, people may really begin to internalize what that loss has meant in their everyday life months or years down the road, so just recognizing that too.
Understood. I have a question about supports in places where people, are, and I'm especially concerned about young people. How are schools and universities doing with this particular issue? Have we been working with them at all? What's going on in that realm?
So we're working actively with 7 different school districts now, and we are so passionate, Matt, about not only grief literacy in school communities, but in workplaces. And so again, our mission out there with outreach is as important as the peer support groups that are in here. Getting schools to think about something as simple as a checkbox on a school intake form. Has this child suffered a significant loss in their life? If the answer is yes, who was it? Why not give them an individual bereavement support plan, like we would give them an IEP, or all the support we can give for academic difficulties and other struggles, but yet a child will experience a death, which is the biggest life disruptor. And many times schools are cobbling it together on the fly. That's just unacceptable, so this and schools are very receptive. Again, I think the pandemic really did move the needle in terms of people's receptivity to these conversations, but we're hoping to work with schools to help, train them. Maybe if there's a loss in a school community, we're doing peer support right at the schools, so kids don't even have to figure out how they're getting to Western New York Compassion Connection. So we're being very, very mindful of meeting grievers where they are, especially when it comes to our region's grieving children.
How many?
I think that is something very, very important, and I can identify with that. Again, going to personal experience, the school district we're in, it took the teacher 4 days to get back to my wife, who was very concerned about our daughter after the loss of my mother. It was 4 days, and it could have been responded to in an email, because that's how my wife presented it, in email form. But you're right about the unacceptability, and people are not going, when someone is grieving, when people are beginning to grieve during this entire lifetime of grief, people aren't going to wait for that long of a response, because there is a lot of despondency. There is a lot of troubled people. We are all troubled in our grief, and to just say, oh, I'm with you, I'm so sorry, we're addressing this now. But to wait that long, Gwen, thank you for that, because I think that's so important that we don't say, oh, wait, hold off, I'll get back to you. It's not acceptable. It's not acceptable.
And then that abiding support, because how a child processes their loss, I know my son, it was his first day of high school the day his dad died. Well, how he's reflecting on that loss now, going into his senior year, as he's making college decisions, and and it's just, again, as children developmentally progress, they're having a different experience with their grief, so that needs to be abiding. That's not just the first few months after. It's not counselors are on hand for a few days. It's, this needs to be, we're in it for the long term, because grief it's with you your whole life, as we, established.
I think it's also incumbent upon districts to have a plan.
Yes.
What is the plan that happens if there is a suicide? What is the plan if there is a traffic fatality? What is the plan if someone has long-term illness, and then it's likely that they are going to pass on? How does the school do? I know there's often a scrambling of how do we handle this best? How do you make supports available for anyone that might be impacted? And because if you don't have that plan, things will crop up. People will just do their thing. So any advice from any of you on what a school should think about? What would be the most important ingredients in some of these plans?
I think creating that culture of grief sensitivity, not only, right from administrator to teacher to the fellow students, the grief literacy that we've talked about, that's so important, giving, their peers a fundamental understanding of what grief is. We're actually creating grief lockers that are going to go into middle schools and high schools that can come out somewhere very high, visibility in the wake of a loss, and there'll be note cards there. So maybe you don't feel comfortable going up, to Andrew, because you don't know what to say. So oftentimes we don't say anything, or we do the worst thing. We avoid grief, and we avoid grievers because they're like lepers, and we don't know what to do or say with them. So, but maybe you could grab a note card and express your feelings on a note card that, can you imagine a child who's gone through a loss getting handed a stack of note cards from their school community and what that would just mean? Again, we can't fix it, but if we can help people carry it and we can understand what they're going through, we're starting to move the needle on all of this.
Mhm. Mhm.
Very
I
good.
think what go ahead.
think one thing I was going to say too is to truly, when you walk up and approach a person, how we're so used to saying, "Oh, how are you?" And what's our first thing? I hope the person says, "I'm fine." And if I don't say I'm fine, what's that going to be? What's that going to mean? I'm going to have to invest a little bit of time. And I really feel it's the approach, how we're approaching one another, how we're looking into each other's eyes, how we're maybe seeing maybe some sort of physical expression, and then to truly offer a presence. But I think we're so much on the move now today as a society. We're so fast. Everything's, you drive up to a stop sign. People are already trying to go into the intersection instead of just plain stopping. We see all of this, and I think that's something that we need to be aware of and sensitive to, is what is going on in that other's life. If someone is maybe having a difficult time in the grocery store line, a hello might be a door open that that person didn't hear before or sense before from anybody. And I've wound up having conversations about grief in a grocery store because of that, because I simply said hello, and the person hasn't heard a hello because everybody's been avoiding the person because they're avoiding the grief. So thank you, Gwen. That's something so important too, is that we have to be sensitive to our encounters that we're having with every human being.
And I think the more we build up people's confidence through giving them the tools and skills, the easier those conversations are going to become and the more comfortable they're going to become. So that's back to why something like this, Matt, is so important to begin normalizing these conversations that so often, again, a bit of a death denying culture. People don't want to think about it. They don't want to talk about it. I know when we had our ribbon cutting here at Western New York Compassion Connection, I did a little shock and awe by opening it up to, everybody was there by saying, this is important because you're going to die. And so is every single person that you love, and there was a little bit of surprise or horror in the room, as if they may not have known that if I didn't say it, but, we wanted people to come away understanding why we have to really force these conversations in order to provide a good here for Western New York.
Well said. We're about out of time. We don't have very much time left, guys. I really appreciated all of your input in today's dialogue. I'm going to give each of you an opportunity to make a last point before we say goodbye. Dan, is there something you'd like to say to the audience that didn't get said yet, or that you'd like to emphasize?
Well, the last thing I want to say is if someone does pass, when you're coming to the funeral home, the funeral director is not the bad guy. A lot of times they come in and like we talked, and they're, it's sudden and anger and why. And we are not the bad guy. We are here for families to help them get through their grief in the process and help them get to the point which we have discussed, that grief is with us all the time, but help them get to the point where we can get them through the initial stage of death and grieving, and hopefully be there for them. It doesn't matter, even after everything is done. So we're here for all the families that want to come out.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you very much for that. And Jeffrey, how about you?
Well, I just wanted to say thank you for helping us be aware. That was when Frank Camerata asked me to be on this. I was compelled. He didn't have to twist my arm at all, because I do realize the sensitivity of grief. And I'm grateful that we're able to maybe break down some of those barriers for a more healthy environment for all of us, and a more safe environment for all of us.
Thank you, Jeffrey. And Gwen, you get the last word.
Oh, well, thank you. Again, it's been an honor to be here. Thank you for paying attention to this, for all that you're doing to strengthen our community with the Anti-Stigma Coalition. And again, just working together to make Western New York more grief literate in our own little corners of the world is going to be transformational. We're here, now to try to hopefully be a little bit of the hub of the wheel on that. And it's just such an honor. I always say, I would give anything to be back at WNED promoting public television programs and not have incurred the loss that's kind of gotten me to this point, but I wouldn't trade the perspective that living the gift of every normal day with such fullness. And, I think that lens you look through is so different when you've suffered grief, and it can be very meaningful and defining in very important ways if you allow your grief to be a sacred part of who you are.
Thanks for that, Gwen. Thank you very much. And thanks to all three of you. As a reminder to our audience, we need you to take the pledge to end stigma by going to our website, letstalkstigma.org. If your organization would like to join us in our cause, there is information on the website as well. Just click on the members tab to find out how. Together, we can reduce stigma and create an environment of support where help seeking, help giving are the norm. Once again, I'd like to thank our panelists, Gwen Mysiak, Jeffrey Sturmer, and Dan Distasio. I'd also like to thank everyone behind the scenes, Mike Telesco from Telesco Creative Group for his vision and technical support, and Karen Karaszewski from KKPR Buffalo for her valuable support as well. We hope you'll join us for our next Facebook Live, which will be coming your way in August, so look for that. If you joined us late or want to tell anyone about this episode, all of our Facebook Live programs are available at our website, letstalkstigma.org. So on behalf of the Anti-Stigma Coalition, until next time, I'm Matt Smith. Stand up to stigma and good luck on your wellness journey.
Thank you.
Thank you.